meaningful work. It's like the Holy Grail because, well, we want it. And as leaders, we feel like for our team's success that we need it. We know that meaningful work is a good thing, but we may not know how or what we can do to create it for everyone on our team. We may be thinking this is something that they're either going to find or not in this work, but it's our goal today to help you think about meaningful work in meaningful ways and to learn how you can create more of it for your employees. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger positive difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast in the future, you could join us live on your favorite social channel. And by doing that, you can get the information sooner, which is to your advantage because this is some good stuff that we do here every week. And you can find out how to join us sooner to know when these episodes take place and how you can get connected by going to our Facebook or LinkedIn groups, two of the places where these are live streamed. You can go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to do exactly that. Today's episode is brought to you by my latest book, Flexible Leadership, Navigate Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence. It's time to realize that styles can get in our way and that following our strengths might not always be the best approach. In a world that is more complex and uncertain than ever, leaders need a new perspective, a new set of tools in order to create the great results their organizations and team members want and need. And that's what Flexible Leadership can provide you. Learn more and order your copy now. remarkablepodcast.com/flexible. And with that, let me bring in my guests, and you'll see their smiling faces as I introduce them to you. Whoops. If I can get my introduction to come back up. There it is. First of all, Wes Adams. He is the CEO of SV Consulting Group. He partners with Fortune 500s in scaling companies to develop high-impact leaders and design operating structures that support high-performance teams. He is also a positive psychology researcher at the University of Pennsylvania, where he studies the leadership practices and organizational structures that help employees thrive. And also with us today is Tamara Myles. She is the author of The Secret to Peak Productivity, which introduced her proprietary peak productivity pyramid framework. Her insights have been featured in leading publications such as Forbes, Fast Company, USA Today, and Business Insider. She has worked with clients including Microsoft, KPMG, MassMutual, and Google. She has a master's degree in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, where she also serves as an instructor in their master's program. And she's also a professor in the Master of Science of Leadership program at Boston College. Together, they have written the new book. That's why they're here today. The new book titled Meaningful Work, How to Ignite Passion and Performance in Every Employee. And with that, we should start to chat. Good morning, guys. Good afternoon, guys.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure to be with you and to have you here. And I love the book. I want us to dive into it. So probably the best place to start is, so how did you end up at this book? And why this book?
So we met on the first day of the graduate program at the University of Pennsylvania, the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology. And we came to the program with very different backgrounds, but with a very similar goal. We really wanted to understand how to make work more meaningful. What is the leadership impact? Our backgrounds were different, but we had both experienced work that was meaningful, that felt meaningful, workplaces where we felt energized and engaged. And then we experienced the opposite, often in the same industry. And so, what made work meaningful wasn't always what we thought it would be. And there were some surprises. And we met on the first day of the program and became fast friends and started sharing ideas, sharing research and resources, and decided to join forces to do the first academic rigorous study that really investigated the leadership practices that make work more meaningful for everyone.
That's actually where I want to go next because I hinted at this in the open that I think a lot of times, a lot of people, maybe they haven't really thought about it, but their thought, if they have thought about it, is, well, it's the employee's job to find meaning in their work or to find a job that they find meaningful. And yet you say on page 8, I'm going to read this from page 8, nearly 50% of an employee's experience of meaning at work is tied to what their leaders do or fail to do. So that's where we're gonna spend our time today. Is what's the leader's role and how this all fits together. Anything before we're gonna get to the 3 C's and all that stuff and unpack all that. But before we go there, Wes, any initial thoughts that you have about that statement, or about what we should be thinking about as we go into this conversation with our leader hat on?
I would say 2 things. One, the reason that this matters is because meaning is the upstream factor that drives all of the outcomes that we want. So you just talked about individually, of course, we want to do work that we believe matters, that we believe is having an impact, where we have an opportunity to learn and grow, where we, are able to connect with people authentically. That gives us well-being. It, gives us job satisfaction and those sorts of things. It keeps us engaged, but also it's the thing that drives performance, productivity, innovation. And there are very strong links now between meaning and bottom line revenue, stock performance, profitability, all of these things. So this is the upstream factor that drives those things that we want. And the second thing I would say is that leaders are a huge influence in that. You said 50, from the book, 50% of how
I didn't say
meaningful.
it. You said it,
Well, I
Wes.
guess you repeated it from the book, but you're
I
right.
happen to agree with it, but
You're right.
yeah.
We did originally say it. But yeah, it's a huge leverage point, right? There's been so much, I think research and literature about how we can do that for ourselves. How do I find a meaningful career? How do I, find more meaning in my job? But the leader's role in that has been, largely, not ignored, but under researched, under focused on. And so what we've really tried to do here is highlight the importance that leaders have in creating meaning and also provide a playbook for them to do that.
And I think you've done that, and that's really
Thank
where
you.
I want to go, is to think about this leader's role piece, and we'll get to the 3 C's in a second. You talked about being upstream, and I love that. There's a parable or a story or a joke, however you want to frame it, in the book, that talks about getting upstream. Like, we can
Yeah.
keep solving this problem that's in front of us, or we can get upstream of it and see what's happening way up here that's the cause of all this. And there's so many things that we talk about in all the kind of work that all of us do, and that our clients all talk about, they want, and meaning is in front, as you said, is upstream of most all of that. And so that's why I think this is such a useful conversation for us to have, and you guys have put some very tangible stuff around it. Specifically, you talk about what you call the 3 C's of meaningful work. And so I've got some specific things I want to talk about inside of each of the three, but why don't one of you just tell us what the three are first, and then we'll dive into each a little bit.
Sure. So, what we found through our study, we interviewed dozens of leaders that were intentionally creating meaningful work, and then thousands of people that were experiencing work as meaningful. And we found that meaning comes from three main sources, and those are the 3 C's. So, the first one is community, and community is the sense of belonging, the feeling of being connected to the people you work with, and that you can show up authentically and bring your full self and your full set of ideas to the table. Community says, I matter here. Contribution is the feeling that you're making a difference, that what you do has a bigger impact. And so community contribution says, what I do matters. And challenge is the feeling that we're learning and growing, that we can use our strengths and bring the best of ourselves to our jobs every day, that we have leaders who believe in us and see potential in us and give us opportunities to grow. And so challenge says my growth and development matters here. And together, those three C's, when all three are present, they really inspire us and motivate us and cause us to become engaged and excited about the work that we do, more creative and more productive. Work feels meaningful when all three are present.
Community contribution and challenge. It's so, I've been preparing for this for a day or so. I finished the book. I've made all my notes, and I just had an insight that if we have time before we're done, I'll share an example of how all this hooks together. But for now, I want to talk about community and first, and people who are listening might be thinking about this. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But ever since this thing called a pandemic happened, that seems to have been upset for us. Our folks aren't always together. We're not always in the same, so the first thing I want to say is that some people might be feeling like that's harder to create than before. So how would you respond to that? And if you agree, what do we need to be doing as leaders to help overcome that?
I think you've nailed it, Kevin. And I don't think it feels like it's harder. It definitely is harder, especially for those of us who are working in hybrid or remote environments. Even those of us who are coming into the office a few days a week, we don't necessarily bump into other people. We don't always have those water cooler conversations or have the opportunity to build more authentic relationships with people, because when we're online, it can be very transactional. We're jumping into a Zoom or a Teams meeting, we're getting right down to business, or there's a lot of communication that's happening on Slack or Teams or whatever program you use. And so we actually have to intentionally create that time that used to happen a little bit more organically. And what that means for leaders is part of their job now is to facilitate that, to build those opportunities in, to create the space for that. One of the folks we really admire, Vivek Murthy, who was the Surgeon General of the United States for quite a while, he has a practice to do this that he calls the inside scoop. And so at the beginning of every weekly team meeting, someone gets 5 minutes and they're invited to share a photo or an object that they have at their house or something, and just tell the story about it. It may be a photo of your last vacation, or it may be, hey, here's this gift that my mother gave me that means a lot to me, and this is why. And it's a way to invite people to bring their full selves into the conversation and to create that formal space for building community and building connection. And that doesn't just make people feel good. It also, he found, facilitated much more effective collaboration across the team and across, teams in different business units. So, this is a really important part of why we show up to work that can be missing if we're not making it happen.
One of the things that I found really interesting in this section, and it's just a short piece, but it's something, I've had a largely hybrid team for, I don't know, 12, 13 years, long time, long before the pandemic, and wrote 3 books that have the words long distance in them, one of them before a pandemic began, and all of that stuff. But you talk about something in there that I think it wouldn't have to only be for a hybrid or virtual team, but I think is a really useful idea, which was the idea of home base teams. Can one of you talk about that? Because I thought it was brilliant, and that's not something I'd ever heard. We have clients that I think could really benefit from that particular little idea.
Sure. So, I have 3 kids and as they went through middle school and I noticed that they were in different schedules. They all have different classes and different, but one thing that they do have is at the start of every day, they go to a home base. And that is their kind of group of 15 people that they do things together with, not only to start the day and ground them, but also to share experiences with on field day and other things. They have those closer connections. And so when we were doing the research and noticing that some organizations do that, and one that we highlight in the book is Dropbox,
Yep.
we kind of saw a lot of these parallels between what education already kind of gets right and what some organizations are borrowing from what's working in schools. And so it's a practice that we propose, and the idea is that when you have a dispersed team and you have perhaps groups of people that work remotely but in the same area, they can be in a home base, and I think Dropbox calls it neighborhood, right? They're like in a Dropbox neighborhood, and these people, they don't need to work in the same function. They can be, and it's actually better if they are cross organizationally and work in different areas. But they can be a home base, and they can get together either in person if they're close enough to each other, once a quarter, but they can also be a group that comes together in a kind of with a regular cadence, whether it's once a month or once a quarter, that they're committed to being together, to doing things together, whether they are facilitated experiences that somebody at work facilitates, or whether there's like a leader in the group that takes charge of it. But the idea is to intentionally cultivate those connections, because they're so important for our own well-being at work, our own desire to show up and come in, but also for the sense of community and the benefits that come, organizationally when we experience those connections.
100%. And I think we could do, I think, the entire show on that point, because I've got all these things in my head that I would like to say, but we can't go there. Right. So one of the things, like when I read a book, especially for the show, but when I read any book, I usually find things that that strike me as in a way that I'm going to be remembering that for a long time. And one of the things for me in this book is on page 88. This is not a book report. I'm not going to ask you to tell me what's on page 88. Besides, I'm reading the arc, so it might not actually be page 88 in the final book, but it's a model where you talk about what can we do as a community that frames around, is the purpose high or low, and is the difficulty low or high? And it's sort of, for those of you that are watching, you can see it just looks like a 4-box diagram kind of thing. And what I like about it is that during the pandemic, there were so many people doing things that were low purpose, low difficulty, like a happy hour, icebreaker games, a Zoom coffee. And then people said, well, those aren't helping us. Well, they did help us until they didn't help us. And what you're really saying here is be thinking about some other stuff. How can we raise the purpose here? And tomorrow, what you were saying about home base could look more like that. Much higher purpose, but not necessarily that high in difficulty. But we could also have things that are higher in difficulty. So I just really love that, the tension or the connection between those two ideas, and how we think about what we as leaders can do to build community intentionally in our organizations, whether we're virtual, hybrid, or altogether. Anything either of you want to add to that before we go on?
I'd love to add, I think that it can feel very intimidating as a leader. Now, all of a sudden I have like I have to like connect people and plan events for them. And, I have my work to do and all of this stuff. And so I think I would add to that idea. Reddit, for example, does something like this very well, where they empower people with the resources to do it themselves, right?
Exactly.
And so as a leader, you don't have to be the planner of all of these things. You can simply be a facilitator. They have a grants program where any group of folks that work at Reddit can apply and say, hey, we want to go to a baseball game together, or we want to take a lipstick making class together, or whatever that thing is.
I didn't even know that existed, by the way.
I didn't either
I didn't
until
either.
we did this research, but it is a real thing apparently.
I'm not a user, so I wouldn't be the right person. So, but
Don't
here's
knock
the
it
other
till
thing
you've
I would
tried it,
say
Kevin.
about all of that, especially on the lower difficulty end of this, is it doesn't even have to be, it can be stuff that we integrate. It goes back to the idea of making it intentional. How do we find ways to integrate? How do we create more interaction, rather, Wes, as you said, rather than simply transaction? I think that's critical. We could spend a lot of time on community, but I'm looking at the clock. I need us to move on. I want us to
Yeah.
talk about contribution. And when we think about contribution, and certainly when I think about folks who have sort of grown up in and studied in the positive psychology world, I would have been surprised if there wasn't a chapter about feedback here. And certainly
Mhm.
feedback as it relates to contribution is important. But this idea of how do we help people see bigger impact, which is another section here, I'd like us to go there. Wes, can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that, about in terms of having a bigger impact?
Absolutely. I think this is where the idea of meaning and purpose sometimes get conflated, right? And the distinction here is, purpose is this idea of having a larger goal, having something bigger that you're working towards, right? And that's important. And I think we really encourage that. And meaning comes from seeing, uh, an advance towards that purpose, seeing progress towards something that matters, right? It's not just having one, you have to activate it by actually doing something to get there. And so whether that's something world changing, you're working at a nonprofit and you're making a difference in people's lives, or if that's even just advancing organizational strategy, as an employee, I want to know how the work that I'm doing day to day ladders up to that, right? How do you connect the dots for me? How do you create a clear line of sight in between what I'm doing and how that's helping advance what matters to the team or what matters to the organization? And so Calendly actually does this really well. So Calendly, the scheduling software that probably most of us are familiar with, is essentially very transactional software, right? It's like, hey, I need to schedule a meeting with you. We're gonna, do a little back and forth. And the mission of Calendly though is to save people time, right? They estimate they save about an hour a week of back and forth from people not having to, do the emails to schedule meetings. And Tope Awantona, who's the CEO and founder, tells this story in a really powerful way. So, he talks about how people can do something with that hour that you get back. Oh, you can do some more meaningful work, or maybe that's an hour you go and spend more time with your family during the week, right? If you add that up over the course of the year, that's like a week's worth of work
Right.
that you get back, right? And so when he meets somebody that uses Calendly, he asks them about, what they're doing with that hour or the time that they got back. And then he'll make a video about that and tell that story of what the customer is doing and send that to the team so that, for example, the person making the iPhone app, the developer who's sitting, at home coding all day and never actually interacts with,
Now they got
users.
a face. Now they've got
Yeah,
a story, right? Now
right.
they've got something to connect to that. That to
Yeah.
me, maybe one of the other things I really love about the book is actually the chapter that follows around greater impact, and it's the idea of personal connection. It's something that
Mm,
we've consulted with clients on a lot over the years, and it's that idea. You have a couple of stories in the book. One about people coding for trucking companies, and then when they
uh-huh.
sent people out to a warehouse or a logistical site, or maybe even got someone in a truck, like it changed everything. Like once people can say, I'm not just doing this thing, I'm doing it for Joe,
Yeah.
or Joe's my avatar here. It's not just this thing that I read about on in an email. Like it changes everything, right? So, Tamara, what would you say about that to help people think about how we help people make this meaning more personal? What can we be
Mhm.
doing as leaders to help make that happen?
I think a key finding in our research was the power of storytelling, and specifically to highlight exactly what you said, to bring this personal aspect and the bigger impact aspect of what people are doing every day to life, right? And so it really is about telling the story, because so much of meaning in life and meaningful work is related to storytelling. It's the stories we tell ourselves. And so we are always telling ourselves stories, and we're going to do that about our jobs, whether the leader helps us or not. We're going to create a story about what it is that we do. And so when a leader can help us craft that story and connect it to people that are impacted by what we're doing, that is so powerful. That is so powerful. And it can happen in any job. And, every job can be meaningful because everything that we're doing every day, whether it's responding to emails or drafting proposals or creating spreadsheets, those are all adding up to something bigger. And it's really helpful when somebody can help us see what that bigger thing is, especially if it's connected to other people.
The third C is challenge. And as I was reading the book, I was thinking about something that happened on our team last week. The word challenge came up in a context that doesn't necessarily matter for this conversation, but one of the members of my sales team said, like, I don't like us when we use that word because people have already got plenty of challenges at work, and we were trying to use it in a different way. And the way she was seeing that word was as a potentially negative word. That's certainly not what you're saying here. And so the reason I share that is because others, as they're now hearing us use the word challenge here, might be sort of channeling their inner Marlene on our team, right? So what do you mean here? And why do we see this as something that's positive and powerful and not just, we've already got plenty of challenges at work, thank you very much?
I would say for the Marlenes out there,
Mhm.
that are interested in learning and growing, reaching your full potential, that requires struggle, right? We grow through struggle, we grow through challenge. And in fact, when we ask people about their most meaningful moments at work, which is an exercise we do often with our clients, a very large percentage of the time, someone will talk about something that was really hard that they had to do, a challenge, a struggle, but that they made it through or that they delivered on, or they created these amazing connections as a result of going through that thing. And so I think it's not always comfortable. It doesn't always feel great in the moment to be doing those things, but there's a huge amount of growth and through that meaning that can come from those challenging moments.
And I want to add two things to this. You know, the kind of challenge that we're talking about is this kind of meaningful challenge that it's not just, a leader kind of throwing people out in the wild and saying, go do this, like we need it done tomorrow, you know, go do it, figure it out, right? Those can be the kind of negative challenge you're talking about where we are in an anxiety zone where we don't feel supported. We don't even know where to begin, but we're also scared to ask because we're going to get fired. What we mean is a high challenge, but also high support. Having high support is critical for a challenge to become meaningful challenge. And what we mean when we say high support is anything from resources, mentorship, classes, tools, so when we have a hard assignment, something that's going to help us learn and grow, but we also have high support. We grow, we learn, we become fully engaged, work becomes so meaningful, and we really remember those moments.
Since I used Marlene's name and I didn't mean to, and I'm sorry, I want Marlene to know
We
that I'm
love
not
you,
using her
We
Marlene.
name
love you,
in vain
Marlene.
here because she is absolutely has a growth mindset. She absolutely grows and all that stuff. But the reason I used her, the reason I used her that quick story was because, well, I think everyone can understand, and I know that Marlene would agree with everything you guys just said. Uh, that word isn't as obvious
Mm.
around this conversation around meaning as is community and contribution. And I think most people would probably say, well, this meaning is about contribution. And what I love
Mm.
about what you've done here is you put the other two with it, and your research backs up that's the combination of those things that matters the most. And to take us back to where we started, all of those things will won't happen automatically, but will happen with the help of leaders. And so for those of us listening as leaders, thinking about, well, which of these could I be adding and doing more of and helping my team see more of, building the connections to, that can make all of the difference for the team. I'm curious to both of you if there's something that you wish I would have asked that I didn't.
I would say, one important part, and I know we talked about contribution as the connecting to bigger impact. But for leaders who are listening and watching and want something they can do right now when they finish listening and they go back to their day, one very simple but very powerful practice that they can implement right away is positive feedback, is to say thank you. There's research from Gallup and WorkHuman that shows that one thank you once a week from a manager is enough to cut burnout and disengagement in half. One thank you once a week. That's really powerful. And so, if you want to start making work a little more meaningful, notice people. Notice what's going right. What are they doing well? What are they engaged in? And then highlight those things. Say thank you. Let them know you've seen them, that you notice them, appreciate them. That can go such a long way.
I completely agree, and I didn't, and everybody didn't mean to give the feedback piece a short shrift in the conversation, but I had to make choices, right? And
I
so
know.
I'm so glad tomorrow that we did come back to that. I do appreciate that very much. Wes, anything that you wish I would have asked or that we would have talked about that we didn't?
I think I would just want to reiterate the fact that, meaning can happen in every job every day, right? And that we aren't talking about, huge transformative changes here. We can give people moments of meaning, small moments every day that have a big impact. And so really thinking about what are these little things that we can do as leaders in the day-to-day work that build up to larger meaning, I think is really important.
So before we finish, I've got a question that I like to ask. Two questions, really, that I like to ask everybody. And so the first one, and Tamara, you can go first on this one. Wes, you can go first on the next one. The first one is, Tamara, what do you do for fun?
Oh gosh, my most fun endeavors lately is cheering for my kids. My son is a wrestler, and my youngest daughter is a lacrosse player. And so being on the sidelines with the community of other parents, cheering them on, is really exciting.
He's also
So
really good. So
There you
that
go.
makes it more fun, I think.
exactly.
Can you guys still hear me? There we are.
Yeah,
I
you
Yep.
got,
froze
I
for a
got,
bit,
I
but
got.
we could hear
My
you.
camera stopped for a moment. Everybody, at least it wasn't too embarrassing for those watching of how I look in this moment. Wes, what do you do for fun?
I love to travel. I was just on a surfing trip to Costa Rica a couple of months ago, which was amazing. And for me, just, seeing different parts of the world, seeing how different people live is fascinating. So that's something I try to make time for.
So the only thing you knew I was going to ask, Wes, I'll have you go first here. What are you reading these days?
So I'm just about finished with a book called Lessons from Plants by Baranda Montgomery. And it's totally a nerdy book, but it's essentially like the biology of plants and how they communicate and make decisions about how they grow and what they invest in, and compares that to leadership and organizations. So it's actually very cool. Like it's a very interesting comparison. So if you want to nerd out, I recommend you
Well,
check it out.
when you think about when we begin to think about organizations as more than just mechanical but biological,
Mm.
and natural systems, it changes the way, and I think in a positive way, about how we think about organizations. So I'm fascinated by that. Wes, it is the first time anyone's mentioned that book on the show, but like every book that's ever mentioned on the show, it'll be in the show notes with a link to get it. Lessons
Awesome.
from Plants. Tamara, you said before we hit the record button, before we went live, that you had 3 books you're reading right now. What's one of them?
So one of them is Shift by Ethan Cross. He's a professor at Michigan. And that's his second book. His first book is also great, but Shift it's very well written. It's a great read, and it's really about learning how to regulate our emotions every day in the big moments, in the small moments. And those are such valuable skills.
Both of those books, as well as Tamara and Wes's new book, Meaningful Work, will be in the show notes for you. But where can people find more about you guys? Where do you want to point people? Where can they get the book? What do you want to say about all that before we finish up?
Please come to our website. It's www.makeworkmeaningful.com, and you can find the book there. But we also have a ton of free resources, tools from the book, and even an assessment that we can take, a self-assessment based on the research that we've done about your leadership and the 3 Cs. So that's a great place to start as well. And we're both on LinkedIn and active there, and on Instagram. So follow us, reach out, slide into our DMs, and we're happy to chat.
Makeworkmeaningful.com, everybody. Now, the question that I ask all of you that are watching or listening, and if you've been here before, you know I'm going to ask, and here it is. It's the most important 2-word question I could possibly ask you right now. Now what? What are you going to do because of you were here? And maybe it's as simple as what Tamara said. Maybe you're going to say thank you to someone in the next 10 minutes. But it could be anything that we talked about today. I'm not going to tell you what it should be for you. I know the notes that I took. One of it is to buy the book Lessons from Plants. I'm just saying. But my point is the only way this becomes more than sort of entertainment is if you take action. And if you are a leader that would like to have all of those downstream benefits, like more engaged employees, higher productivity, and all those other things, then hopefully you leave this conversation knowing that one of the upstream things that you should be trying to figure out how to do is to help your team see and create more meaningful work for them. And so you got things here today that you can tangibly go try. My challenge to you is to pick one and go start. Wes and Tamara, thank you guys so much for being here. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And so everybody, if you found this useful, tell somebody else. If you found this for the first time, where have you been? Make sure wherever it is that you watch or listen to podcasts that you subscribe so that you're able to come back, tell somebody else. We'd love to have you do that. Why? Because we're here every week. And next week we'll be back with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.